Okay, so this video is about the number pad and how it works. So if we go to, say, make boundary contours and we click here, up pops the number pad entry, and we can add more numbers, or we can clear entries, or we can clear it completely. It does error checking. Can't do anything if that's blank. If we go above or below, then it should error out. So you put 0 in, and it's a low error. You have to add between the values and that sort of thing. Every time you push a button in Windows Forms, it creates an event. So each individual button is a control. A group of controls like this keypad is a control. And we use events and event arguments, like what was triggered and what happened, to communicate with the GUI. Now the GUI has to allow the program to continue. So rather than checking every button to see if it was pressed, when a button is pressed, then it sends out an event notification that a button was pressed. If we push the 6, then it sends an event that a 6 was pushed. So, this isn't going to work, so we can cancel right out of it. How does all that work? All right, so we created another project within Ag OpenGPS called Keypad. Now, the basic fundamental user control, we create a class and we base all the capability of user control. We create our generic keypad, and all that this class does is every time we push a button, it runs button pressed, and it creates an event handler, and it raises this function. And then that function just basically says what key was pushed, and we assign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, to the individual keys, and then that sends out a character value of what the key was pushed. And then every one of the keys runs the same event handler, because you don't want an event handler or a function for every key you add. We just want to send one function for all the keys. So then we create a control based on the generic keypad, and we have all of these buttons. And with an individual button, they send their own event trigger, and then this raises that function, raise button pressed, and then it creates another event to tell whatever form that one of these was pushed. And then it just sends, when we push this, it sends a 5. So now we create a form. This is our little entry form. This then is a control made up of all the buttons and each of their actions and that sort of thing. So if we look under events for the buttons control, we see our button pressed as an event. So every time a keypad button is pushed, it will run this. And then now we just determine which of the keys were pushed, and then what to do about it, and how do we change the display and that sort of thing. So for example, if an error came up, we want to clear it every time we add new values. If it's a number, we just want to add the number. If it's like the backspace key, then what we want to do is take the last character off only if the length is greater than 0. Because if we didn't check first, you can't delete something that isn't there, and it would create an error. Now the decimal point becomes a little more complicated, because you can put in 0.16, or you can go 1.6 or 16 point whatever. So we have to, if there already is a decimal, then we don't want 2 decimals, because that would be wrong. So if there already is a decimal, then just ignore it. If there isn't one, then we just want to add the decimal. If the decimal is the first character, now we want to prefix it with a 0, because 0.6 doesn't work for parsing it, so we need 0.6, so we add a 0. The other thing is, if there's a negative already, then you have to insert the 0 between the negative and the point. So you have to do all these checks to make sure that it's being formatted correctly. Same with the negative sign. If it already has a negative sign, we don't want to add it, we want to remove that. But if it doesn't have one, then we would just want to add the negative sign in front of the number. So if it already has one, we want to take it away. So we substring out the first character because the negative should be in front. We take that away. If we want to cancel, all we do is we just dialog result is a cancel, and then that goes back to the main program. And we'll look how that works in a minute here. Or clear the whole display, just simply take the text box number text and just clear it. Now the OK button, one of the first checks we need to make is if it's empty, just return, like back to the control, because you can't default a 0 and send a 0 as OK, because 0 may not between the limits of say 1 and 3. Now we check to see if it's below the minimum or above the maximum, and we fill in the display accordingly and then just return. If the value is good and it's above minimum and below maximum, we just return that dialog result. Okay, so how does this work in a screen? Every time you touch one of these, then one of the built-in events is enter, which is confusing with the enter key, but this is entering the control. Like if we click on here, that action means we've entered the control. And you can also do a leave and that sort of thing. But what we want to do with enter is we want to run this function. So that's a built-in event argument. This one now is part of the WinForms, and what it sends for parameters is the sender, who sent the thing, and what the event arguments are. So all we do now is, in this case, the numeric up down, someone entered it and they touched it. So we want to run this function, which sends the what sent it, and then if we can't put focus back on something else, then we never leave it, so we can never enter it again. So let's go to this definition of this function. And what it does is it sends our which control did we enter, and of course that's numeric up down, and then we change the background color of it to red, and then we run that form that we were just looking at, that numeric form. And so we send the minimum and we send the maximum. This is built into the numeric up down. It limits how high and how low you can go, and of course the value. And then we just show the dialog. And then remember we've hit the OK button there, and from this form is a return value, and now we fill in the numeric up down with that new value, and then we change the color back to normal again. So a lot goes on when you push that button. So again, to recap, we have our event in the generic keypad, which is based on user control. And then we have a number pad, which is based on our generic keypad. Each of those buttons sends off that button pressed. The raise button press then sends which character we've sent to a numeric form then, which determines what that is and does the action accordingly to modify this text box and show you what you've pushed. And once we hit OK, then we come back and take the focus off of that numeric up down. And so we go from here. Once we come back from that, we pick the button cancel. So now you can push this again. If we didn't do that, you already entered in this one. You can keep pushing it, but it doesn't bring up the keypad. So here we are entering it. Now again, this is the control, the individual buttons running the individual event argument. That creates an event argument from a button, which creates an event argument from this whole control, which then changes the value in the text box at which point we hit OK, and that changes it. 2. Enter. So same way, we can go 0, whoops. Like the plus minus part, we hit, we have 8.9, simple enough. But if we have point, see now it brings up that 0, 0.8, plus minus, adds the minus sign in front, takes away the minus sign. It'll error check. That's that min-max value sent from the original control itself. That's all controlled by this guy. This guy sends all its parameters in the function to bring up this window, and it sets it accordingly. So you can just clear it, hit 2, now we hit enter. Now it meets all the requirements, and it fills it in. And then now we set focus on this button. Because if we didn't take focus off, and focus stayed on that, then that's no longer detected as enter, because we've already entered it. So you can put that, push that as much as you want. It doesn't trigger an enter event. So I hope that explains a bit how some of the events and that sort of thing work. It's a lot to take in, but there you go.